Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, March 15th. I'm Laura Kornfield, and this is IBA News, broadcasting from Jerusalem. Iran should face sanctions for sponsoring terror attacks, testing ballistic missiles, and violating human rights. This according to Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon, who delivered a speech at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington. While in the U.S., the defense minister met with his American counterpart, Ash Carter, to discuss America's military assistance aid package to Israel. Ya'alon noted that Israel has evidence that advanced Russian weapon systems purchased by Syria or Iran are reaching the hands of Hezbollah and Hamas.
There are at least 3 reasons today to sanction the Iranian regime. One is the proliferation of arms and terror. We have other evidence that they deliver weapons to terror organizations in the region, to Hezbollah, which is here, now even in the Arab League, a terror organization, deliver money, delivering weapons, advanced weapons, and so forth. Delivering weapons to the Houthis in Yemen, via Oman today. Hard evidence on a daily basis. It's a violation of UN Security Council resolution. Terror infrastructure in the last year, 2 cells terror cells have been exposed in Europe, and even in other countries. So it's one reason to sanction this regime. The second is the missiles, the ballistic missile test. Very provocative, believing that they are not going to be harmed because we shouldn't be the party spoilers of the deal. The third reason is human rights issues. This regime succeeded in strengthening the grip in governing. And yes, we hear that most of the Iranians are not happy with this regime, but they succeeded to strengthen the grip in governing in the last 30 years or so, going back to the revolution of 1979. Hanging dissidents in the marketplaces today. Oppression, suppression. We are not happy from the fact that Russian-made weaponry systems are delivered to our hostile enemies, like Hezbollah, Hamas. The problem is that these weaponry systems are procured by Syria or Iran and then delivered to this kind of end users. Of course, when it happens, we provide hard evidence.
Meanwhile, the U.S. vowed to continue pushing for United Nations Security Council action on Iran's recent ballistic missile testing. This as Israel's ambassador to the UN urged members to take concrete punitive measures.
These were designed to be capable of delivering nuclear weapons. This merits a council response. The council needs to take its responsibility, and Russia seems to be lawyering its way to look for reasons not to act, rather than stepping up and being prepared to shoulder our collective responsibility. We will continue to push in the Security Council in the 2231 format, bring forward the technical information that Iran itself has made public, showing that the technology they used is inherently capable of delivering nuclear weapons, and thus inherently defying Resolution 2231. So we're not going to give up at the Security Council, no matter the quibbling that we heard today about this and that. And we also can consider, of course, our own appropriate national response.
For most of the nations in the world, if you are wrong about Iran's intentions, it will be an unfortunate mistake. For Israel, it will be the most fatal one. Let me be clear. I don't call on you to act today in defense of Israel. We have always defended ourselves when threatened. But history has taught us that when a dangerous regime goes unchecked in threatening one state, no country can be sure that they are not next in line. Ladies and gentlemen, the time for talk is over. I call on the Security Council to take action. Iran must be held accountable, and concrete punitive steps must be taken.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas insists he is opposed to military activity and will not permit an armed intifada. In an interview with a Kuwaiti television station that was conducted several weeks ago but aired this week, Abbas said he was not ashamed to admit that the second intifada was detrimental to the Palestinians, and therefore he has no interest in another armed confrontation. In a related development, a special French envoy appointed to arrange an international peace conference in Paris in July has arrived in the country and is slated to travel to Ramallah later today to meet with senior officials and discuss the French peace initiative. The city of Tel Aviv was placed on high alert this afternoon after a soldier reported a Palestinian wielding a knife tried to stab him at the corner of Rokach and Eben Gviro streets before managing to escape. After nearly 3 hours of searches, it turned out it was a false alarm, and the soldier, who was unarmed, was apparently attacked by an intoxicated homeless man that tried to rob him. Tensions ran high in the city for several hours before authorities ruled out the attack was of nationalistic background. Helicopters hovered in the sky and dozens of police cars and motorcycles were deployed in the area. Barriers were erected at several locations across the city, wreaking havoc with the traffic for hours. Russian troops began leaving Syria today as peace talks resumed in Geneva between regime and opposition officials to end the bloody 5-year war. Russian President Vladimir Putin's announcement of a troop withdrawal last night came as a surprise. IBA's Margot Dudkevich reports.
President Putin is not talking about a total troop withdrawal from Syria, where Russia will retain a military footprint in the country. In a televised address to his countrymen last night, Putin said Russia will maintain its naval base and an air base in Syria. He emphasized plans to intensify his country's diplomatic efforts to achieve a peace deal that will end the 5-year civil war in Syria. The Russian president informed Syrian President Bashar Assad of his decision. He also spoke with US President Barack Obama. White House officials said the two discussed the next steps that need to be taken to end hostilities. The United Nations Security Council described President Putin's move a positive one.
We have also took note, very good note, of the decision by the Russians to withdraw part of their forces or start withdrawing part of their forces. That's what we'd like to see. When we see forces withdrawing, it means war is being taken a different step. So that's good. This has been made possible thanks to the good cooperation now between the US and Russia. And the fact that this has made possible first the ceasefire, which is in place, which is holding, has been made possible the launch of the negotiations, which has been possible, it's a fact. Now the decision just announced today by the Russian president to start withdrawing, that's a positive statement.
In Geneva, where peace talks between Syrian regime and opposition officials continue today, opposition officials welcomed the Russian president's decision.
You know, whatever Russia decides, this of course will affect the side of the other side, will affect the regime. Hopefully we see this on the ground, that Russians are not in Syria anymore. We want, Russian people to be friends in Syria, but not really partners in killing the Syrians. It will be important if this decision is taken. It will be more important if Putin decide to really stand beside the Syrian people, not beside the dictator.
Staffan de Mistura, the UN Special Envoy to the talks, warned the only alternative to achieving peace is the resumption of war.
At any negotiation, especially as delicate and important and crucial like this one, and at the beginning of, we hope, the end of a conflict, a lot of strong statements, sometimes rhetoric statements, sometimes preventive statements. We should be talking about, between us, what will be the outcome of these discussions and negotiations. That will be the judgment.
Syrian regime officials described the start of peace talks in Geneva constructive and positive. President Putin's announcement could be evidence that he's sending a message to Damascus that Syria must reach a political solution and negotiate a peaceful transition. His decision may also be an attempt to extricate his country from a costly military venture. Yet it's certainly too early to judge whether the resumption of peace talks, as the Syrian civil war enters its 6th year, means the conflict has turned a corner. While the February 27th agreement for the cessation of hostilities has led to a reduction in fighting in the country, it has failed to completely halt the violence. Whatever the outcome of the current round of talks to achieve peace in Syria, the situation is being monitored by the millions of innocent Syrian civilians, caught up in the fighting and have nowhere else to go. Margot Dudkevich, IBA News.
And joining us now from our Tel Aviv studio to talk about latest developments is Middle East expert Dr. Mordechai Kedar of the Begin Sadat Center at Bar-Ilan University. Thank you so much for being our guest, Dr. Kedar.
Pleasure, Laura.
Syria peace talks in Geneva entered their 2nd day today. What are the chances of reaching a deal?
Well, it all depends on the pressure which is maintained by the cessation of the acts by the Russians on Assad, because he is the key person here, and any concession which he can give to the other parties might bring the parties to some kind of agreement, which will bring him maybe to the termination of his presidency, and the others will feel that they achieved something.
Well, Russia has begun withdrawing its troops from Syria. What effect will this have on the country and on the entire region, in fact?
Well, first of all, apparently the Russians achieved what they wanted to achieve, which is an emirate for the Alawis in the northwest shore of Syria, with naval bases and air bases which they need out from Russia. Secondly, from the beginning, they made it very clear that they are not willing to sacrifice themselves on the altar of the Islamic State. And when they leave now, apparently what is left behind them is most of the space of ancient Syria, which was until 5 years ago, is occupied by the Islamic State. And I don't see here no state in the world coming to replace the Russians in eradicating this Islamic State. So we have to start getting used to the fact that if the world doesn't act seriously against the Islamic State, what was formerly ISIS, this will stay there maybe forever.
Dr. Kedar, despite the February agreement for cessation in hostilities, violence continues. Today marks the start of the 6th year of the Syrian civil war, and President Assad shows no signs of stepping down. Could this change if a peace deal is reached?
I don't think so, because don't forget that the Islamic State and Jabhat al-Nusra, the two main Islamic factions, are not part of the deal. They are not part of the talks, and nothing which can be arrived or reached in Geneva between Assad and other rebels doesn't bind these two big organizations. And don't forget, in my view, Saudi Arabia, the state which is behind the rebels, those who are not part of the negotiations, today feels very satisfied to see how the Russians are leaving. And I think also the Turks are also rather satisfied, because so far they were afraid that the war in Syria will continue into Turkey, especially with the deterioration of the relations between Russia and Turkey. Now I think that they feel much more comfortable.
Dr. Kedar, returning to home and the 6 months of terror attacks in the country, what needs to be done by the government and security forces to halt the terror attacks? Or does the solution lie, in fact, in Israel returning to the negotiating table with the Palestinians?
The Syrian issue has nothing to do with us and the Palestinians. I think, personally, that the only solution between us and the Palestinians will be the Emirate solution, because, as you can see, states in the Middle East are deteriorating because they are conglomerates of ethnic groups and tribes and religious groups and sectarian groups. And this is why we have to establish 8 Palestinian Emirates. One in Gaza is already functioning for almost 8 years or 9 years since 2007. And we have to establish 7 more Emirates, one in Hebron for the tribes or the clans of Hebron, and one in Jericho for the clan of Jericho, and one in Ramallah, and so forth in Nablus, in Kalkilia, Tulkarem, and Jenin, while Israel should forever remain in the rural areas in order to make sure that we don't get another Hamastan if we establish a Palestinian state all over the West Bank or Judea and Samaria with terrorist contiguity. And this will be a threat, a strategic threat on Israel. This is why we should go forward with the fragmentation of the Palestinian Authority into these Emirates, because this is the only thing which works in the Middle East.
Dr. Mordechai Kedar, thanks so much for being our guest on IBA News. Always a pleasure. The Defense Ministry has approved adding the words "fell in battle" to the gravestone of Tova Weissman. Weissman, who was an off-duty soldier, was killed by a Palestinian terrorist last month at the Rami Levy grocery store in Benjamin. The Defense Ministry had originally proposed inscribing that Weissman was killed in a terrorist attack, but his widow, Yael, demanded that her husband be recognized as a soldier fallen in battle since he was mortally wounded when attempting to stop the knife-wielding attackers. Speaking at an international conference on anti-Semitism taking place in Berlin, German Chancellor Angela Merkel said the desecration of Jewish tombstones is equivalent to the desecration of German culture. Merkel stressed that hate and violence against synagogues means that the pillars of our free society are shattered. Her statements come in the wake of official figures released by her government that showed Germany's supporters of the extreme right committed the vast majority of anti-Semitic attacks against Jews and Jewish symbols in the country. To date, the Jewish population in Germany numbers around 100,500 people. Residents of the southern city of Dimona were permitted to come out of their houses this morning after authorities ordered them to stay indoors during the night while emergency workers cleared up a bromine leak. The hazardous material spread when a freight train carrying a container of bromine gas derailed after colliding with 2 train cars that were parked in the city's rail station. 4 people were lightly injured in the incident. Residents in the vicinity were instructed to stay inside their homes overnight until authorities cleared the damage. So what is the secret to living a long life? As we reported earlier this week, Israel Kristal, a 112-year-old Holocaust survivor who moved to Israel in 1950 after surviving the Auschwitz death camp, received a certificate from the Guinness World Records confirming he is the world's oldest living man. His son Chaim Kristal describes his father as an optimistic person who is always pleased with what he has.
His mother died when he was 7 years old. And his father was taken by the Russians as hostage in 1940, in the beginning of the First World War. And then he remained without parents, and he has to survive. I think this makes him very strong inside, and it helped him after it to pass other things, other severe things. My father is a person very optimistic. When he saw a glass with half with water, he's very pleased with the half of water that is full. He never sees the half who is empty. He never sees.
Over 1 million Israelis did something good today as part of the 10th annual Good Deeds Day, which is marked across the country. The now decade-long project, which was initiated by businesswoman and philanthropist Sherry Arison, encourages people to volunteer and give back to the community. A record number of volunteers registered for today's activities, which included the cleaning up of forests and beaches, renovation and painting of welfare institutions and community gardens, and conducting fun days for underprivileged or special needs populations, as well as activities for the elderly and Holocaust survivors. Good Deeds has become a global endeavor, including some 68 countries, which are set to mark the day on the 10th of April.
משהו מוכר או משהו אחר מתוך כל הדברים היום אני יודע שאני
Well, good news for Israelis who dream of seeing the Great Wall and the Forbidden City. The Chinese carrier Hainan Airlines is joining the sky competition as it gears up to launch its new direct Tel Aviv Beijing line next month. The entry of China's largest private carrier into the market is expected to significantly lower the cost of flights to and from China, which up until now were under the exclusive domain of Israel's national carrier, El Al. Hainan will offer 3 flights a week with just over 200 seats on its Airbus 330. Flights will start on the 28th of April and will depart on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays in order not to directly compete with El Al. The tourism ministry welcomed the new addition, saying it will greatly benefit the local industry, which can receive a boost from Chinese tourists. In local money matters, shares were down in the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, while the shekel was mixed in foreign currency trading. Here are the late afternoon numbers. Turning to the weather forecast, and winter is back. Temperatures are expected to drop even more, and scattered rain showers across the country will continue. Chilly conditions will last throughout the day tomorrow, including snow at Mar Hermon. Here's a look at the highs and lows for the next 24 hours at home and abroad. And that's all for this newscast. Ari O'Sullivan will be here tomorrow, same time, same channel. Make sure to join him. I'm Laura Kornfield, wishing you a good evening and shalom from Jerusalem. We leave you now with more of the official song for Good Deeds Day. Go out, volunteer, and do something good. It'll come back at you.
שהם הופכים למציאות, אז יש לזה סיבה. לעשות טוב, להרגיש טוב, לעשות טוב, להרגיש טוב, לעשות טוב, להרגיש טוב, לעשות טוב, להרגיש שאפשר לעשות בעולם, כל אחד לחוד וביחד כולם. מתוך כל הדברים היום אני בוחר לתת משהו ממני למישהו אחר.